So I thought, given, now you have it all in French, so I'll have to pretend I know French, which I'm supposed to know, but don't as of yet. Affichage. No. I just want to do slideshow or whatever you do to. I mean, these things didn't used to happen to me until I became an honorary professor of computer science, and then it all went terribly downhill. So given I'm speaking first, I'm going to talk a little bit overview over recent initiatives that I've been involved in, particularly regarding data governance and regarding algorithms. And I'm going to, hopefully, if I have the time at the end, go into a little bit more detail in a recent commission that I was co-commissioning with the UK Law Society, which discusses the usage of algorithms in the UK justice system. So just as a background, why do we have a problem? Well, I think most of the people in this room already know why we're starting to worry about governance of algorithms and automated decision-making, automation, more data from IoT, etc. And I think the third, the implication is that policy users want to make decisions that can be audited, but also have a tremendous pressure for cost saving. This is true in the UK, but also in many other countries. And I'm sorry, I have a robot picture. This probably classes me as a bad person. And why is this happening now? We already know why. It's about changes in computational power. It's about changes that people have started to use algorithms that were already used in a slightly more low-risk scenario, commercial online retail. And then one of the consequences that we're using more opaque methods, that it's become harder to understand exactly how the data is being used, and that's why people worry about governance. And I'm not going to tell you what machine learning is, but just some of the backgrounds of why we're thinking about this just now. People are worried about surveillance more generally because it's become extremely easy to collect statistics on each and every one of us in every aspect of our lives. Transparency has become a major concern. People are worried about the fairness. Accountability and transparency are sort of coming up into the fore more recently. But when we start to make decisions, people are starting to ask the question, what does it even mean to be fair? And then finally, giving up your data, what does the nature of consent mean in a modern society where storage is easier? And this has triggered a lot of global interest. So this is actually a collation from last year. But almost every country worth its salt has released a report which stipulates its approach to AI, which it's now de rigueur to have a section which talks about governance and ethics. And all of these say more or less the same thing. Don't be bad, be good, and write down what you try to achieve when you start to automate decision making. And if you want the full discussion of the different strategies that have come out, there's an article by Tim Dutton. And just to drill that a little bit further, you've seen, especially in Europe, but also in Australia and Canada, given the European influence, a wish to have an opinion on what automated decision-making means in practice. And of course, 2 years ago, we had a new general data protection regulation, which made it easier to at least see what people were thinking about this. And then as an aside, of course, Europe is not the world, and certainly Europe plus Australasia and Canada and US is not the whole world. Of course, we have other countries who are sort of rising in the importance in the global AI stakes. So what have all the different reports really sort of gathered together on this? Well, just here are a few more reports that you might want to pick up and take a look at. The Royal Society and British Academy reports I was involved in, they were pretty early. The IEEE project was ongoing for a long time, and I think its interest very much lies in the fact that it's a truly international project which has more than one point of view. And then you've seen developments as well in Germany and from sort of bodies such as the Welcome, which is a charity in the UK, and as well the French reports in this field. What did the Royal Society report say in this field? Well, I think we set out some of the things which are still important but are very, very hard to implement. So the Royal Society report really emphasized the need for standards, that as we start to use data together, we need to have open standards which are clear and common between users. The second is public buy-in, which means we need to do more than just publish the picture of Terminator, but actually have a meaningful discussion and figure out what people find acceptable. And then the difference between thinking about algorithms, also worrying about the data as the center of the technology and what you're able to do. And the Royal Society report stressed that yes, governance should probably center around how we use data, but this will vary between sector to sector. And I think it's quite meaningful here that a lot of the initial algorithms arose in online retail, where our trade-off between gain and cost is very different from, say, the health sector or even a sector such as whether you get a mortgage or not. And then the main key concerns that the report raised was one of direct harm to people, also concerns about jobs and replacement, and fairness and transparency, which I think fairness has received a lot of press, but a lot of the technical developments have been quite narrow. Okay, I say this as a technical person. I think the developments that we've had are really mathematically pleasing and cute, but the world is messy. And I don't think really the developments reflect all of the uncertainty that's present in the real world. Okay, you can go somewhere like causal fairness analysis, but then you have to model all of the messiness in a convincing way. The British Academy and the Royal Society banded together, deciding that the key thing to worry about was really the data, right? It's all very well to have nice algorithms, but you can't really think about the governance of algorithms in isolation from data. It recognized the fact that this all came from a new technological context, but I think what was setting this report aside is really worrying about the overarching principle where how should we approach the notion of data governance. And we had help from some legal and philosophy experts when we wrote the report, and they strongly pressed that we should think about all of this as in the end, things have to come back for human gain or human flourishing, as in the general person in society. And that was the overarching principle that was used to assess all of the other recommendations. They recommended a new body to steward the landscape. The UK, of course, already has the Information Commissioner's Office, which is very good, but quite small. I think if everyone put in a query to the Information Commissioner's Officer, they'll probably drown. There are two new bodies that have been set up in the landscape. One of them a charity, I think, the Ada Lovelace Institute, I believe it's a charity. But there are also things that fall under BASE, one of the government organization. I think the difficulty here is if you do have a body, what is its teeth? But the OECD has also produced a number of principles. The European Commission for the Efficiency of Justice has also set up a set of principles. If you look at all these principles and you do their intersection and their union, the intersection is not the empty set. So there are things that really come in as important across the reports. And then you might say, why are you redoing the work multiple times over? And I think that's a little bit about reaching consensus. So I was involved in some of the reports I just talked about, but I wanted to talk about the commission that I was involved in because it's interesting, because it's more concrete. So 3 years ago, I was approached by the Law Society of England and Wales. And they wanted to commission a piece of work to understand how algorithms should be used in the justice system. Now, why the justice system is an interesting application to think about is because at the heart of any method you design is how you decide on the cost of a decision. And why justice is interesting is that costs are not symmetric, and the costs are high, usually. You could be deprived of your liberty, for instance. And at the start, we sort of did a census of the UK, and because of funny historical reasons, it's actually not the Law Society of the UK, it's the Law Society of England and Wales, because Scotland has a slightly different legal system. And what we did was a survey of the counties and police forces that were already using algorithms as part of their daily lives. And as you can see from the green across the map, that was a rather patchy but still clearly present set of regions across the UK. So it was clear that this was the right time to start to look at how we viewed algorithms in the justice system. So the deal was that we were set up to examine the use of algorithms in the justice system and see if there were controls needed to protect human rights and trust. And the evidence we gathered, we went around the UK rather like a dog and pony show, and we got evidence. We even went to Wales. We got evidence on what was already taking place and what concerns law firms and the public, etc., had about the usage of algorithms in the justice system. And we also looked into the question of bias and fairness, as that's something that's come up a lot in the technical community, as well as standards. And if you want the full report, it's been published. And I should mention here Michael Veal as well, who was not one of the commissioners, but really helped us with actually writing the report. And we sort of started out by identifying why were people worried about using algorithms in the justice system. Well, there was a lot of concern about personal dignity, that basically human rights would be curtailed or infringed without people knowing. Of course, a concern about reduced transparency in decision-making, downright procedural concerns, and then some, as we went along, more interesting concerns started to bubble up to the surface. I think 4 is very interesting. My co-commissioner, Sylvie Delacroix, brought this one up. The law changes all the time. The law is a living thing. It changes as society changes. But if you start to automate recommendations to judges and others on how they should interpret or treat cases, or even what cases you should be treated, then it starts to really stagnate the law, because you train it on the past and you look at previous decisions. And the concern was really that this would change how the law evolved. And let me just bring it up to sort of the foreign, think about human society. How have our, like in Britain, how our approaches, for instance, to individual sexuality and its regulation changed. In the 1980s, I think in the UK it was illegal to be homosexual, for instance, at least if you acted on it. And then bias and discrimination was a huge concern, as well as coming up with oversimplified representations of actually issues that were quite complex. And then you might say, why did the Commission seek to sort of facilitate such a procedure? And really, I think the main driver here is what we have as number 1, resourcing pressures, but also desires for increased proactivity. You want to look under the hood, and there's a feeling that if you automate more, it becomes more transparent. Because we can, there's data and infrastructure availability. There are new types of crimes, which always require technological advances. Access to justice is a big concern in the UK. People are concerned that there is not enough money for a normal person to seek legal redress. And there's a hope with greater automation that that will lead to enormous cost savings and increase the access to justice. And a sort of a fundamental belief in the efficacy of computational prediction rather than having the person. And I think that's the feeling that we'd like to have a thing deciding that can't be wrong. And that's a little bit dangerous in itself. So, and sort of various benefits, such as auditability, you can see why decisions were made up to some limit anyway, because some things are not very auditable. Consistency and control, you might repeat and get the same answer, but that would depend on how you train an automated system, and you can monitor performance and not use things like hunches and best guesses. What the report found was that there was at the moment a lack of explicit standards and best practice. There definitely needed to be a register, like at least people should be aware of what was being used. There was a big concern that there was not enough of in-house capacity, so that people would go out and buy automated decision-making systems, and not anyone who bought it would be able to understand what they actually bought. And some systems and databases that are already operating today, such as facial recognition, there was concern that there was a lack of clear and explicit lawful basis for using them in the UK. I'm not going to get into that debate, but that specific concern was raised. And so we recommended that there needed to be clarifications, legal safeguards, and we sort of stressed, which all reports do, that now is the time to do something before it's too late. But that's not a very unique comment, because if you look at any of the reports I mentioned, they will all say the same thing. And so we recommended that there needs to be more oversight, there needs to be sunset clauses. The Information Commissioner's officer needs to have more resourcing, so they have the actual resources to have a bigger role. And it would be good to have an explicit code of practice for using algorithmic systems in criminal justice. So you'll sort of notice that these are a lot more at the high level compared to a lot of the granular discussion we've had in terms of fairness. And I think the reason why is that these problems are, in a sense, coming up at so many levels at the same time, you almost have to start at the high level. And then I'll skip a few of the main points because there were too many. So I will just conclude. It's clear from this session today that the debate is ongoing on all these issues. It's getting discussed. And for a while, I was almost concerned that there were so many reports and so much talking. But I think the reason it's good is to reach consensus, you do have to be able to discuss. I think the debate is very much hampered by a common language. So as I became involved in this commission, I set myself a target that I'm a technical person. If I could communicate one thing to the legal side, it's just the difference between predictive algorithms and explanatory algorithms and why we cannot treat them in the same way. The concern that technology will outpace regulation sort of permeates all of these different reports. And there is a clear danger of disconnect between expertise and regulation because we use the same words but mean different things. I was part of a UK report, but of course, many automated systems will be exploited globally. And this is sort of confounded by the fact that we see a lot of national interests rising on the scene, where it will be in a country's interest to develop more quickly, and that may hamper a country's wish to regulate things very strongly. Okay, I think I may be on time to take one or two questions.